You are listening to the Interactome, a podcast by a group of young researchers who want to connect you to the world of science by sharing their stories and perspectives. Just in case their bosses are listening, they want to remind you that the opinions expressed here are their own. They also want to remind you not to take anything they say as medical or professional advice, as they are not doctors. Not yet, anyway. Stay tuned about that. And, without further ado, welcome to the Interactome.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Interactome. I'm Joe.
I'm Lauren.
And I'm Pickle.
And tonight we're having another episode of Science Stories. Last time none of us were on the last Science Stories episode, but we all thought it was kind of exciting and fun, and we wanted to share some interesting stories related to science that we've heard or experienced with you. So I guess I don't know, how do we want to start this off? Who's hyped to share their story with our listeners first?
Yeah, I can start. I have actually a 2-for-1, some might say.
Boy.
It's a little science story and a documentary recommendation. So I'm going to be talking about this documentary that I watched recently and cute little science story to do with it. So it's titled Explorer, The Last Tepui, with Alex Honnold. So any of the listeners who know about Alex Honnold will know that he's an amazing climber. You should also watch Free Solo. Watch Free Solo first and then see how amazing Alex Honnold is. And how he just, he has no fear. I mean, he handles his fear really well. But this is not about him. This is about this climbing team. So there was this world-class climbing team led by this guy named Mark Sinnott. And basically they go deep into the Amazon jungle to do this first ascent. So never before been climbed, raw cliff face up a 1,000 foot sheer cliff face to deliver a biologist to the top of the cliff. An 80-year-old biologist. And so this guy's name is Bruce Means, and he has been he lives in Florida, and so he does a lot of his ecology research out in Florida, but also he is fascinated with the Amazon rainforest for good reason. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about these tepuis. I'm going to have to put a picture of these in the description notes or something, because they're just really, amazing. I've never seen anything like this. So they are in the Guyana Highlands, which is an area in the Amazon rainforest. And there's about 100 of these tepuis, which are 1,000 to 3,000 foot high, essentially just rock faces. And they formed over time as the land rose, so over billions of years. And then rainwater wore away most of it, and now it leaves behind these islands in the sky. And essentially the flora and fauna on these islands is isolated, so similar to the Galapagos, where we have really unique, rich biodiversity. This is an isolated ecological system, so pretty cool. No one's been up there onto these cliffs. Biologists such as this Bruce Means biologists have been able to go to the top via helicopter, but no one's been able to get onto the cliff faces for obvious reasons. You can imagine. So this whole documentary is the team trekking through deep, thick Amazonian rainforest. They're knee deep in mud. They're scrambling over these tree roots. And this 80-year-old man is slipping and falling, and they're how are we gonna get him to this cliff face? It was crazy. So I don't want to ruin it. But what I do want to talk about is the pretty cool biology that is involved in an expedition like this. So this man, Bruce Means, has devoted his life to characterizing new species. So he's obsessed with snakes and frogs and things that like I'm not obsessed with, but I'm sure they're important. Like they're definitely important. And so the whole goal of this entire expedition is for them to discover unknown species, and they do. So the manuscript, so he's writing like a scientific manuscript currently, is in writing. So the photographs they took of the new species, they haven't released because he has to like classify them, and it's going to take years and years and years to do like DNA testing. And he does breeding experiments to make sure that it's a different species to anything that's been classified before. But yeah, it was pretty amazing to watch. And, you know, this is all like this man and many other ecologists and biologists that devote their year's work, their life's work to really helping us understand the biodiversity of places such as the Amazon rainforest. And it just was really heartwarming, and it's a nice reminder that like we live on this planet shared with, you know, amazing nature. And I think we should all think about our activities and our actions and how they might affect the little frogs and snakes and birds and things that are just living their lives in the wild Amazon rainforest. And we're destroying their habitat. So, yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to share that. I really enjoyed watching that and just thinking about this cool stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, that, like, this whole sphere, like, kind of like ecology, like, more like zoology, like, actual, like, biology of, like, different species, like, this whole area is really, like, I'm a molecular biologist, and so this is very, very foreign to me, but like super exciting. And I really have immense appreciation for people who like go out into the world and like explore new places and are like, wow, we found this cool new frog. I remember speaking of cool new frogs, Lauren, I think you it was either you or Sarah who brought up the different species of frogs.
Yeah, that was Sarah.
Way back in like our what's in a name episode. I think it was episode 3 with the different frog species, like minimum, minuscule, and mini something else, and I can't remember.
Yeah. So not only do you get to discover new species, but you get to name them really cool names. So yeah. If anyone's listening is interested, they should check out that episode because Sarah had some funny names that she found. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I also, similar to Joe, I'm not a biologist that studies flora and fauna, but I have great respect for people who do, because it helps us, you know, really understand the biodiversity that exists, so that we like have evidence for conservation efforts. And also a lot of like historically a lot of medicine and dyes and like all sorts of things that we take for granted in our everyday life come from the natural world and come from species that were discovered from biologists who do work like this. So it was a cool reminder to appreciate a field that's very different to my own.
In another life, I will be a zoologist.
Yeah, in another life, I'm a marine biologist. I was.
Same. Oh, really? Very cool. I used to be obsessed with a guy named Jacques Cousteau. He was I think he was like the inventor of the scuba equipment or something like that. Oh. He was a French like explorer person. I mean, I honestly don't remember too much about him anymore, but I would like scream this song about him by like this guy by John Denver like at the top of my lungs when I was in like first grade. Like I was obsessed with him. I wanted to see all the fish. Funny. But yeah.
Did you ever go scuba diving?
No, that's kind of like on my bucket list. I mean, I'm kind of scared,
qualified.
but like excited.
I love it.
Really? Can you
Yeah,
teach
I
me?
got my scuba license. No, I can't teach you, Joe. That's
Oh.
not safe. You need to be taught by a qualified instructor. I've not been for a while, but I love it. It is a very scary in the beginning, I will admit. It's like scary in terms of like lack of control, because really you're at one with the ocean and you are breathing out of an oxygen tank and you can't just swim to the surface, especially if you're deep down. So yeah, it's a good exercise in learning to keep yourself calm, I would say.
Yeah.
And one comment I have from that is, and it kind of follows a similar vein from our previous episode with astrophysics, but studying science outside of a lab. I know a lot of science happens in the lab, so being able to go out into the field, into the world, and see it in person, that's a whole different area beyond anything I really know. So that's really cool.
Oh, one cool thing to mention to our listeners is like this was a thing that I had to do like for a class in freshman year of college. They required us to download an app on our phones and like go out into the woods and like take pictures of plants and identify the plants. Like you could do that. And like there are these fancy apps or like different apps where you can like participate in like different experiments that people are trying to run. They could go like they call them like citizen science.
Yeah,
programs.
there was actually a big initiative at my undergrad, because my undergrad we're really focused on environmental science. That was one of the big areas, and there was a huge initiative there that was citizen science driven, and that was to do with collecting data along the Chesapeake Bay, so on the East Coast. Yeah,
cool.
Citizen science is cool, and if you're not a scientist by training, it's a really fun and meaningful way to get involved. It really contributes hugely to data collection and can make a big change. So anyone interested, check it out.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Pickle. I think you may remember this, the folding at home thing that we did a while back. I mean, I think that's a little different in that like you're kind of just letting like other people use your computer to I mean, you can probably explain this better than me, but my understanding is that like you allow other people to use your hardware to run simulations of like molecular interactions and things like that.
Yeah, and I really got involved with that during the early stages of COVID, as I know you did too, Joe.
Yeah.
As a little bit of a background, I won't spend too much time on this, but we did start a folding at home team, and we set up a website and everything. It was really cool. But yeah, to Joe's point, you can take, like, if you haven't done folding at home, you basically get these simulations that you run from the whoever client you set up for whatever. You can do cancer, you can do COVID, whatever you want from a list of things. And you basically run these simulations and send the data back to scientists so that they don't have to use just their resources. They can borrow yours. You just set you're going to go to sleep for the night. You can just leave your computer on, download a simulation, and send it back. It's a really cool way to kind of help out. Yeah. Without really even having to know much or do much.
That's really cool. So I have a question about that. I know this is a divergence, but I have a question about that. How, like, do they have to check that you did it right? Or is it like they give you the code, they give you everything, you just copy it into your computer or your system?
Yeah, so it's like a set of instructions basically that you can use just your computer's CPU, central processing unit, or you can also throw in your graphical processing unit if you have one into the mix too. And basically all the instructions are there for the machine. You really don't have to do anything other than press play, and your hardware just goes, executes all the instructions, runs the simulation, and the data obtained from that gets sent back. There's ways to check. I know there were a couple times where my hardware was unstable because I was messing around with it, as I do. But it was able to detect that my hardware wasn't stable and that the result I was going to send back was bad. So it would scrap it and start over.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it has built-in protections into it.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
And one of the really cool, there are a bunch of publications that have come out of this work. And so a recent one, if I remember correctly, was trying to simulate different proteins from the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, and see if they're like, if you could model like different coronavirus proteins and how they kind of like jiggle and wiggle around in water. Like, can you find like special little pockets where you can stick a drug and shut off the protein or things like that? And so that's what the simulation is doing. It's literally just like you're trying to model a protein as it jiggles and wiggles around in 3D space. And so that requires a lot, and that's why they need a lot of hardware to do it. And word of warning, I made a dumb mistake and tried to run simulations like almost like 24/7 on a laptop that I had, and it was not equipped for this kind of thing. It didn't really have the cooling
processing power.
I think like it had sufficient processing power to help, but I think it just couldn't handle being run like this intensely for so long. So just make sure you have good hardware for this that can be cooled down, because otherwise you're going to get a fried motherboard like I did, and you're going to have to get a new laptop. And so that was a dumb thing on my part. But hey, science is like 90% failure. So yeah. And my wallet is crying, but yeah, so that's that.
Yeah, well, hopefully that is a sign that you should maybe stick to benchwork science. Maybe this is a good segue though, because I know you wanted to talk about some science that's been done at the bench in the lab, so we can kind of transition from the lab being from nature's lab to
the lab.
Yeah, for lack of better words, lab.
Yeah. So this I'll kind of like share kind of like some of like kind of an anecdote behind this, like a more personal one, and then kind of go into like the more lab stuff. So this is a story that a lot of people here at the University of Pennsylvania know about, and we've learned about it quite a bit in my medical school training. I'm for context, I'm in the second semester of my first year, but we're learning a lot about like molecular biology and the immune system and a bunch of other things. And so the story goes like this. Basically, there was a family, the Whitehead family, and they had a daughter named Emily, and Emily had been diagnosed with a kind of leukemia. And leukemia is basically when when you actually produce way too many of a specific kind of immune system cell. In this case, and Lauren knows more about this than I do. So feel free to jump in and correct me at any time, Lauren.
Yeah, leukemia is my jam.
Yeah. So it in this case, poor Emily she was producing tons and tons of one single kind of immune cell. In this case, a specific B cell, and it was just starting to go all over her body. And lead to kind of basically suppressing other immune system cells, and it, if untreated, could lead to her unfortunate demise. And so doctors had tried tons of treatment for it, and the cancer this is a kind of cancer. It was not responding to any of the treatments, and so as a last-ditch effort, her parents reached out to a guy named Dr. Stefan Grupp here at Penn. He's a pediatric oncologist, and he talked to them, heard about their story, and essentially said, "Hey, we're starting a phase 1 clinical trial." So phase 1, we've talked about this a little bit before, but the goal of a phase 1 trial for any kind of treatment is to look at generally just toxicity. Is it safe? But yeah. Where should I go with this? Oh, Lauren, I think you have a correction for me.
I was just going to talk about leukemia a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
So leukemia are actually cancer. Leukemia is actually cancer of the blood. So cells that start in our bone marrow that are kind of primed to become blood cells, so they can become red blood cells or white blood cells. And something goes awry in the programming, and this causes them to divide into much faster growing. So if you were talking about ALL, right? Acute lymphoblastic leukemia.
Yeah, it's ALL in this case.
Yeah, so the acute stands for fast growing, and lymphocytic. Sorry, not lymphoblastic. Well, you can use, I think the words are actually used interchangeably.
Yeah.
And so lymphocytic means it develops from early or immature forms of lymphocytes, which are a type of white blood cell. So it's actually when you're making your blood cells and the process goes awry, which is quite frightening, because then, as you can imagine, your blood is going throughout your body, right? It's a liquid, what we call a liquid cancer. So that is one of the reasons why it can be have a really poor prognosis.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit, the your white blood cells are many kinds of white blood cells are important players in your immune system, and so with all of this happening in poor Emily's body at the time, her family reached out to Stefan Grupp, and he said, "Hey, we're starting a phase 1 trial for this new kind of cancer treatment." In this kind of cancer treatment, they call it a chimeric antigen receptor T cell. And so T cells are kind of like they're white blood cells that kind of look around your body and survey to make sure all the cells are kind of functioning as normal. Or specifically killer T cells or cytotoxic T cells do this. And they look to see if all your cells are just have the normal proteins and that they should. And if they do, the killer T cells say, okay, fine, I'm off, I'm leaving. But if something's wrong and you have the cell in question that they're looking at has like a weird mutated protein or things like that, sometimes they can literally just like kill that cell. So they literally like release like a bunch of toxic things at the cell and make it like explode. Hence killer T cells. And so the idea that a bunch of people had was like, what if we can take these T cells and trick them into targeting exactly what we want them to? And so over many, many years, many different kinds of people like work together to develop a chimeric antigen receptor, a special protein that you could basically have on the outside of these T cells, and it would stick to your protein that you wanted it to stick to. And when it did that, the T cell would say, oh my gosh, something's wrong here, and kill that the cell in question. And so there was a lot of work done to make sure you have like the right chimeric antigen receptor in this case. And so the specific chimeric antigen receptor that they were using here was one that targets we were talking about T cells, but this T cell that we specially engineer would target B cells, another kind of white blood cell in the body. And specifically, this is the kind of white blood cell that Emily had way too much of. That was kind of like growing out of control. They were immature B cells that were just like completely unchecked. And so if we could take these specially modified T cells and put them in her body, in theory, they could go and take down these out of control B cells. And so that's what they did. And so they drew some of Emily's blood and did a special process to separate her T cells from all her other blood cells, like the red blood cells, her B cells, her cancerous B cells, and other things. And then they gave special treatments to these T cells to make them grow a lot. And so you got a lot of T cells. And then what they did was they took a special virus that can only infect one cell. We've talked about viruses before that can infect, they infect one cell and make tons of copies of themselves and go on and on. But in this case, the virus can only infect one cell and then it's done. And so in this case, the virus has the DNA for this chimeric antigen receptor. And so by treating the T cells with this virus in the lab, they basically popped this the code for this special modified protein inside the T cells. And so now the T cells were they're ready to go because now they're producing this chimeric antigen receptor on the outside of themselves, and so they can use that as a little tool to go and check and see where their target is. And so they then took these cells, and after doing some special treatments to they did a lot of chemotherapy treatments to actually deplete a lot of her or reduce the strength of her immune system and deplete a lot of white blood cells initially before they added this in. But once they did that, they injected these specially modified T cells into her bloodstream and let them do their work. And this was the first time that this had been done in a pediatric patient, a child at 6 years old, in order to treat this kind of cancer. And obviously because of that, everyone was super cautious and they were trying to make sure everything was okay. And while she was in the hospital, shortly after, she actually got really, really sick, and they didn't know what was going on. And so everyone, on her care team was trying to figure out what different high levels of proteins that she might have or biological changes that she might have. And they saw that she had really, really high levels of these proteins called interleukins, specifically interleukin 6. And interleukin proteins are basically messengers that help immune cells and other kinds of cells communicate with the immune system to coordinate immune and inflammatory processes. And so she had way too much of this specific one. And it was leading to low blood pressure, changes in heart rate, difficulty breathing, and it could have been really, really bad. And so her clinical team was trying to figure out what to do. And so they called up a guy named Carl June, and who works here at Penn as well. And he was involved in the team, in the science behind her treatment. And he said, well, I actually have some people in my family who are on this special treatment for I think it's it might be, give me a hot second here. I think it's it's for arthritis. It's an arthritis treatment. It's actually an antibody that binds to this specific interleukin and gets rid of it. And so they treated her with that. And so since it was already approved for arthritis, it seemed like it was safe, potentially, they decided that it was worth the risk to try it in her and reduce her chance of her condition worsening. And remarkably, once they treated her with that, her condition improved drastically. And now she hasn't had any sign of cancer since. And obviously, it wasn't an easy road. But these specific engineered T cells still are hanging out in her body, at least last time they checked. And they're making sure that since they were originally her own T cells, her immune system and her whole body welcomes them and uses them as normal. And they're just hanging out to make sure that no cancer ever comes back.
Yeah.
But the big thing is she's cancer free. As of last year, she was looking at colleges. Amazing. And I think she wants to be either a environmental scientist or do some work in film. Cool. And so it was this really, really cool story of like how many, many, many years of researching immunology and cell biology and stuff like that helped basically completely cure, at least in theory. I like, God forbid the cancer ever comes back, but most people don't think it will. But like in theory, like you've cured this cancer.
Yeah.
And it's just really cool. And they had to have an understanding of all the molecular biology going on there, like with all the different interleukins and all the T cell, B cell interactions in order to actually get this to work.
Lot of work went into that. But so worth it, right? If one person is cured of cancer. Actually,
absolutely.
Something that that reminded me of is something I learned in a tumor immunology class, is that the theory is that actually our immune system and cancer cells are in kind of this equilibrium with each other, whereby our immune system is doing its business, searching for anything that shouldn't be there, and that includes cancer cells, and clearing them out. But at some point, whether it's because the cancer cells undergo like genetic mutations, or they have an insult to them that causes them to adapt and become faster growing or more aggressive, they'll then outgrow the immune system's ability to kind of get rid of them. And so that is one of the reasons why, that is one of the explanations for how people relapse within, some people relapse 5 years later after treatment. Some people relapse 10 years later. Some people even 15 to 20 years. And so this is one of the theories behind that. So I wonder in her case if, she has some of these cancer cells arising, but the CAR T cells are there in place and are clearing it before it's detectable by our standards. So pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely quite possible. And I mean, maybe someone's done the experiment.
I think the thing is that it's like at a level that's not detectable. That's the
just for context for our listeners, like oftentimes like immune cells you might have a lot of a specific kind when you have like an infection, but afterwards like they go away. You're only left with like a very small amount that can then like grow back and like do their thing again. And so that's, correct me if I'm wrong, or that's what you're referencing. Yeah, you have memory cells, but they're hard to detect because there are just so few of them in your body usually. One thing though, an important caveat is that in this trial, there were other people who were involved as well, and many people had the same experience as Emily. Some people though didn't do as well on the same treatment. And so there is variation, and it's not a total cure for everyone. Like some people did relapse within the time that they were studying everyone. But it was a drastic improvement compared to what has been done before. And it's certainly a great starting point for more to come, which is what's really exciting about science. There's always room for improvement.
I was going to say, like, what a feel-good story, especially when you're like performing tests on such a small, like, young patient, like pediatrics. That doesn't happen very much, right?
Yeah, it's I think I mean, to be honest, I don't know the rate at which these kinds of things happen, but just because I'm not in that sphere right now. But I mean, a feel-good story like that, I think, is rarer than one might like. So yeah. No.
Thanks, Joe.
Well,
that was really
thank you.
really good to hear. And I love the field of tumor immunology, and CAR T cells are an amazing technology. So thank you for giving me that, and the listeners, and Pickle, that heartwarming story. One good story after another. And now, to finish us off, we have Pickle, who is coming in out of left field, talking about...
Well, when I say hard drives, does everyone get really excited? Does it really get you go right? See, thank you. I knew Joe would be there for me.
Hey, hard drives are so important. Like
they are. And so a lot of my stories have to do with, like I was saying to these folks before the show, it's like Mythbusters, computer science. Failure is always an option, and you learn a lot from that failure. You have to, otherwise it's going to be a long, difficult, frustrating road. And so my story today is about one of those really frustrating moments where back in college, I had a MacBook, and a lot of the stuff that we learned was using Windows software. And as a Mac user, it was a lot of the time, oh, go figure it out. And so that was good in some ways. It helped me learn, kind of figure things out a different way, carve my own path. But at some point, it's just not really conducive. It's a little bit more worth your time to kind of be working in step with them. And so some people may not know this, but Mac OS does, or at least did at the time, offer a way to do what they call dual booting your computer, which meant you could run 2 operating systems on it. You could have your main Mac operating software, and then on the same drive, you could also have Windows.
Oh, wow.
But it's kind of a cool little feature that they don't really advertise and talk about.
Wait,
I can see why.
Is that still a thing? Like,
so the reason I say I don't know is I know that Apple's undergone a big change in their hardware. They used to use Intel CPUs, and now they use their own proprietary silicon. Right now, I think it's M2. Yeah. They call their system on a chip. But since Windows doesn't... I actually have to walk that back, because I think Windows does. There's a version of Windows that operates for ARM, which is the underlying technology for the Apple chip. It's just not as ubiquitous as x64, which is, at the time, my MacBook had an Intel chip in it. And since most Windows machine, well, I shouldn't say most, about a good chunk of them do, either Intel or AMD, but they're all x64 based.
Yeah.
Or x86, sorry, 64-bit x86. But anyway, that's kind of a nuance. I think whether or not they can do it today, at the time it was absolutely an option. It was something that I wanted to capitalize on as soon as I found out about it. But you have to do what's called partitioning your hard drive. And if you're going to just use, there's a tool that Mac OS has built into it that you can use. It makes it really easy. But being a computer science student, and kind of like Icarus flying too close to the sun, I wanted it all.
Oh no!
I wanted it all. I wanted to have not only Mac and Windows, but I wanted to put Ubuntu on there too, have a Linux distro. Why not? So Mac OS makes it pretty easy, and it's actually kind of scary how much they open it up to the user. They really let you do what you want with it. And I was able to section off my hard drive into pieces. So like 250 gigs, for argument's sake, reserved for Mac OS, another 100 for Windows, and then another 100 for Ubuntu. And so while I was setting up these partitions, anything other than Mac OS needs a little bit of massaging to work properly. So trying to set up Ubuntu after kind of clearing off this empty hard drive space for it, not everything worked. Like the backlight and the keyboard didn't work, for example, but the operating system was there. And then I set aside space for Windows, and I went to try to install it outside of the way that Mac OS will guide you through, and it didn't quite work. There was space allocated for it, but it didn't have what was called a bootloader. So even if I tried to select that partition, it didn't know how to start correctly. So I figured, I made a mistake. I'll just start over again. And as I went back into Mac OS to clear these partitions out, I made the mistake of wiping my Mac OS partition, which is fascinating to me that it even let me do that, because in Windows, you can't. Windows won't let you make a mistake like that. But Apple was like, yeah, I'm more than happy to let you do that. Surely you know what you're doing. My only explanation for how it even let me do that was, my guess is, enough of the operating system was in RAM to let me continue using the computer, because as soon as I restarted it, it was gone.
Wait, so you deleted the Mac operating system from within the Mac operating system?
I did.
Wow.
How does that even
You know the
happen?
joke of deleting... That's what I was saying. I couldn't believe it even happened, because I deleted something, and I was still able to click around, close windows, restart the computer. So I thought to myself, surely I didn't make a catastrophic mistake like wiping my main operating system. Lo and behold, I did.
Oh, no.
Because when I started it back up, I saw an icon I've never seen before. It was a big question mark instead of where the Apple logo was supposed to be.
Oh my gosh. So were you able to get it back up? Like,
so fortunately, I was able to save it.
how? That's crazy.
There's a lot of good luck. I fortunately had enough forethought to back up my operating system with Apple's Time Machine, which is a really good piece of software.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at the end of this, I was back up and running, at least on Mac OS, like I was a couple days ago. And the way to recover it from this kind of unrecoverable state is there's a certain key combination. I think it's like the Command Shift R and something else, and it'll bring you into this special menu. And I'm sure this is saved off on a segregated chip inside the laptop itself,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's like EEPROM or something like that. But I was able to connect to the internet in this very basic shell of an operating system and go through the recovery process of downloading macOS again.
Mm-hmm.
So macOS was able to be pulled from the internet, and the whole hard drive was wiped and set up as an Apple operating system, which was fine. And I was able to pull my backup off of the hard drive with Time Machine, get it back up and running. But I recall the event. It was, I don't remember the year. It was probably 2018, but it was the Super Bowl weekend. So while everyone else was out Super Bowl parties, watching the Super Bowl, having fun, I was panicking whether or not I was going to get my assignments in the following day.
Oh my God.
Because I couldn't use my computer. So fortunately, it was all recovered. I was able to kind of continue where I left off. It probably shaved a couple of years off of my life, but that's okay because we were able to continue.
Honestly,
And,
also, at least you're in like a computer science program, because if you'd been in any other program and you're like, yeah, so I wiped my Mac OS off my drive, so they'll be like, as if, like, that's the worst
Right.
excuse. That sounds as bad as like my dog ate my homework. It's like the digital
exactly.
equivalent. So
Also,
funny.
So
sorry. I won't.
all I was going to say is you have to remember that I brought this upon myself. I was the one who was not satisfied with one or two operating systems. I wanted them
You
all.
wanted all the power.
So
wait, what about
I
Linux?
did.
Wait, is Ubuntu Linux based?
yeah, so
Okay.
that's the cool thing about Linux is that there's a bunch of different distros for it, and Ubuntu is just a really nice, GUI, easy one. There are a lot of specialized ones, and everyone has their favorite flavor of Linux, as they call it. But Ubuntu was a good way to get me up and running. And I think the kicker in all of this was both Linux and macOS are built on Unix. So that means at their core, they have a lot of similarities. And I could have done a lot of my computer science work in the macOS terminal because it's Unix based.
Yeah.
Anything that other people were doing in Linux, I could have done in that terminal without any other operating systems required.
Yeah.
So, but of course I learned that way later and not at the time.
I just get this. I did this image of like a montage of you just like furiously like typing away, and the camera's like zooming around you like 360
Yeah.
degrees as you're just like like tapping with like dramatic music,
Yeah.
and then it's like 12 hours later. And you're like, I'm finally done. Like
That reminds
Mission
me of
accomplished.
like those characters in shows that like everything always goes wrong for them, and you're watching it and you're like, no, don't do it, no.
Don't do it.
And you're like, they did it. That's
Yeah,
if
but-
anyone was watching you, they'd be like, no, don't do that.
Wait,
No.
no. Wait, but the real question is, can you now put all three operating systems on your same computer?
I could stand up. I know where the hard drive is. It's right over there. And it has all three on it. So if you wanted to see a 2012 MacBook Pro that runs 3 different operating systems, I have the hard drive.
Amazing. So mission accomplished, technically.
Right. Failure is always an option.
Yeah.
We recovered. We moved on. We're smarter for it.
So what did you do differently the second time in order to get to work? Like,
well, I didn't delete my operating system.
That's a
first
good
and
one.
foremost.
That's important.
But yeah, I couldn't tell you the exact motions anymore because it's been a few years.
Mhm.
But what I had done was, through the process of installing and reinstalling, I found the right combination of things to do. I think what it ended up being was, to get Windows to work, start by doing the Mac tool to partition the hard drive in boot camp mode,
Mhm.
so that you can get Windows running. So you can get Mac OS and Windows running.
Yeah.
Once those two are running, take your Mac partition, don't delete it, but shrink it, so that some of the unused space on that can be allocated for Linux,
Yeah.
because that bootloader cooperates a lot better with what Mac has out of the box.
Mm.
So following it in that order allowed me to have greater success. Of course, what I was trying to do isn't something people commonly do, so it's not like there was a guide or tutorial for me to really follow online. But like a lot of things in computer science, there's a lot of trial and error, and I made my mistakes and I learned from it, and I eventually got to where I needed to go.
Cool. Well,
incredible
you made the
lesson.
mistake, so we don't have to. Not that, honestly, I'm going
Exactly.
to try that because I can barely run a line of code that's been given to me.
I wouldn't recommend it. It's not really necessary, but it was fun.
But it's a really good story about the importance of persistence. Because I think I'm in a similar situation computationally as Lauren. I know what strings are and like integers, but like that's really it.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Yeah, we're getting there. But one day I will be able to analyze my own sequencing data. That is the goal. But like I think that really, like, I think that's something that can be extrapolated to any area of science, in the sense that, like, you really sometimes you gotta persist.
Yeah,
And sometimes
and totally failure is a part of the process, right? And
yeah,
you
Absolutely.
learn the most when you make the mistake yourself, because you never want to do it again. And
Yes.
that
Exactly.
is as true as it is when you're pulling apart your hard drive, as it is when you're in the lab, as I'm sure it is when you are collecting specimens and you like miss something. Or so I think it's like pretty broadly, I know it's broad across science and pretty applicable to like most things in life. So
yeah. Every scientist that you come across, like, no matter what field they're in, is gonna have a story like that.
yeah.
Like it's just a part of life when you're doing science. And I mean, like, failure is a part of life in general, and overcoming it and learning from it is also a part of life in general. Getting all philosophical here,
Yeah.
but that's what we do. So yeah.
So thanks so much to everyone for listening. I hope that you got something useful or interesting out of our science stories today, and we hope you tune in for the next one.
Yeah. One thing before we go, we just need to give a shameless plug for our social accounts. You can follow us on Twitter at the Interactome, or at Instagram at Interactome_media. Or you can also, if you are so inclined, check us out at www.interactomedia.org. Also, we are available wherever you can listen to your podcasts, everywhere from Spotify to Apple Podcasts to Audible, which I actually I didn't even realize we were on Audible until recently. We're also on YouTube, wherever podcasts are not sold but listened to. So thank you for listening.